Have you ever wondered what really happens when an empath falls in love? Truly, deeply, impossibly in love. Most people think it's just heartbreak, an overreaction of a sensitive soul. But Carl Jung discovered something that could shatter everything you thought you knew about empaths, emotion, and love itself. If you're someone who feels everything, who absorbs emotions the way a sponge drinks in water, and you've ever loved someone you couldn't have, Jung believed your heartbreak wasn't just emotional suffering. It was something far deeper, something sacred and terrifying at once. He found that this kind of heartbreak creates a psychological rupture so profound that it literally breaks open sealed chambers within the soul, hidden rooms most people never even realize exist, let alone enter. This isn't about being too sensitive, or too emotional, or loving too hard. This is about a rare psychological architecture, a unique wiring of consciousness that Jung spent decades studying. He discovered that empaths experience unrequited or impossible love in ways that differ fundamentally from how most human beings process rejection or loss. When an empath loves someone they cannot have, Jung observed that something begins to happen at the deepest level of the psyche, what he described as psychological fragmentation, followed by sacred reassembly. Your sense of self doesn't merely crack, it detonates, scattering into 1,000 luminous shards. And in that explosion, you are confronted with aspects of yourself you've unconsciously buried since childhood. Old fears, forgotten dreams, and fragments of your own soul that had been waiting, silently, to be seen again. Jung referred to this as the empath's curse in his private writings. Because when you love like this, you don't just care for someone, you become a living receiver for their unspoken emotions, their hidden wounds, their soul's unfulfilled desires. You feel what they refuse to feel. You carry what they're too afraid to carry. And when they finally walk away, you're left holding a kind of emotional gravity that was never fully yours to begin with. Most therapists will call this codependency. They'll insist you need stronger boundaries, that you've blurred your identity, that you've lost yourself inside another person. But Jung knew something they didn't. He understood that empaths who love impossibly aren't losing themselves. They're experiencing what he termed transpersonal love, a psychological phenomenon where one consciousness merges, however briefly, with another. In that merging, both the exquisite beauty and the devastating truth of human connection are revealed, showing what love can become when it transcends the protective walls most people never dare to lower. You've probably wondered why this particular person's absence feels like you're missing an organ, why the space they once filled inside you still aches as if they were part of your very biology, why their energy seems to linger in your body, pulsing quietly beneath your skin, long after they're gone. Why, even after months, without a single word or glance, you can feel them thinking about you, as though some invisible thread still ties your heart to theirs. Jung would tell you, this isn't imagination. What you're experiencing is your empathic system still processing the energetic entanglement that forms when someone like you loves without walls, without filters, without the emotional armor that most people wear for protection. You love with the gates of your soul wide open, and that openness leaves energetic echoes that take far longer to fade. But here's what Jung found most remarkable. The breaking open isn't the end of your story. It isn't collapse. It's initiation. It marks the violent yet sacred beginning of something few people on this earth will ever truly comprehend. If you've ever been shattered by loving an empath, you couldn't have. Or if you were that empath, still holding fragments of someone who left. Stay with me. Because what Jung discovered about what happens next will change the way you understand every moment of pain you've endured. It will reshape how you see your heartbreak, not as destruction, but as transformation. Share in the comments if you've felt this. If you've loved as an empath and been broken open in ways you couldn't explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. Jung made a discovery about empaths that completely contradicted what modern psychology teaches about boundaries and self-protection. He found that empaths who experience impossible love aren't damaged by their openness. They're not weak or dependent. They're operating with what he called permeable soul boundaries. This rare psychological structure, Jung believed, once existed in ancient healers, mystics, and those he described as the sacred wounded. Your ability to feel everything, every shade of joy and grief, isn't a flaw in your design. It's an evolutionary adaptation, a marker of consciousness that hasn't hardened into the rigid separateness most adults develop to survive in a world that demands emotional shutdown. When you love someone you can't have, your empathic system doesn't just register your own grief. It feels theirs, their confusion, their fear of intimacy, their unhealed trauma that makes them unavailable, their yearning for closeness, battling their terror of being truly seen. Jung documented countless cases of empaths who could describe in precise detail what their impossible love was feeling, thinking, or struggling with, even when that person was thousands of miles away and hadn't spoken to them in years. This isn't psychic ability, though Jung never entirely dismissed that possibility. It's your nervous system's profound capacity to read and hold emotional frequencies that most people's defenses block out completely. Think back to the first moment you met them. Remember how you didn't just notice them, you felt them, before your mind could even explain what your heart already knew. There was a recognition that happened beneath language, beneath thought, beneath the conscious mind's ability to explain or categorize what was unfolding. It wasn't something you could name. It was something you felt. Jung called this phenomenon soul recognition at the empathic level. It's the moment your entire system silently identifies another being whose emotional wounds vibrate at the exact frequency of your own unhealed places. This is why the connection felt so powerful, so inevitable, so completely beyond your control. You weren't merely drawn to them through desire or attraction. Your unconscious recognized something deeper, a mirror, a teacher, a reflection of the very parts of you that still needed to heal your relationship with love itself. It wasn't coincidence, it was resonance. And this is where Jung's insight becomes almost unbearably profound. The person you loved, or who appeared in your life and captured your soul, was never randomly unavailable. Jung found that empaths are instinctively drawn to people whose emotional unavailability mirrors their own hidden inaccessibility to themselves. You pour everything into them, give endlessly, love without measure, while remaining quietly unavailable to your own needs, your own sense of worth, your own right to receive the same depth of love you so freely offer. In that light, impossible love becomes a sacred mirror. It reveals how you treat yourself, how you abandon your own heart while trying to save someone else's. It shows how you can make yourself emotionally homeless while building a home inside someone who never had space for you to begin with. Jung observed that many empaths come from childhoods shaped by emotional instability, where safety depended on sensing and managing the moods of those around them. As a child, you learn to monitor every emotional shift like weather, to detect the storm before it appeared, to read silence as warning, and to carry responsibility for feelings that were never yours to hold. You became hyper-vigilant to other people's emotions because in your world, survival depended on it. That early training gave you extraordinary empathic perception, but it also carved a painful pattern. You learned to sacrifice your own needs just to preserve connection. And so, when you experience impossible love, that ancient wound awakens. The breaking open that follows forces you, sometimes brutally, to feel the weight of how long you've been leaving yourself behind. The heartbreak becomes an initiation, an unveiling of self-abandonment you've carried for years without realizing it. Carl Jung identified something that would forever alter the way we understand this experience. He discovered that when an empath loves someone impossible, they enter what he called the dark night of the empathic soul, a kind of psychological death and rebirth that few people ever face, simply because most never love without protection. It's not depression, though it may look like it from the outside. It's the soul shedding its old identity, a process most will never comprehend, because they've never dared to love without armor, without self-protection. This is ego death at the empathic level. Every identity you've ever built around being the one who understands, who heals, who holds space for others, collapses the moment the person you poured your soul into walks away as if your love meant nothing. The very foundation of who you thought you were crumbles, leaving you staring into the hollow silence that follows. The devastation that follows isn't tied to how long the relationship lasted or whether it was ever formally acknowledged. Jung found that empaths could be completely undone by someone they had known for only weeks, or even just a handful of days. Because for an empath, the magnitude of connection isn't measured in time, but in the depth of recognition that takes place beneath words, beneath logic, in that electric silence between two souls who see each other too clearly. You touched something in them that they refused to let you name. They touched something in you that you'd spent a lifetime guarding. So when they left, it wasn't just a person who walked away. It was the collapse of a belief. The death of the quiet conviction that loving purely, feeling deeply, and giving completely would always be enough to make someone stay. Jung documented what happens in the aftermath of this breaking open, and what he found was extraordinary. Empaths shattered by impossible love undergo a transformation he called forced individuation. While most people spend decades slowly separating their identity from the people they love, empaths are thrust into that process all at once, violently and without warning. It is not a gentle unfolding. It's an eruption of self-awareness that leaves no illusion standing. You have no choice but to rediscover yourself, because the person you unconsciously used as a mirror for your own worth has vanished. You have no choice but to learn to contain your own emotional intensity, because there's no one left to receive it. You have no choice but to face who you truly are when you're no longer performing the roles of understanding, accepting, waiting, or hoping. This process feels like dying, because in a very real psychological sense, it is death. The empath who loved without boundaries must dissolve so that a new version, the individuated empath who loves with sovereignty, can be born. Jung called this the phoenix process, a cycle of death and rebirth within consciousness itself. He noted that most people abort this transformation because the pain of staying broken open feels unbearable. They rush to fill the emptiness with new relationships, with distractions, with spiritual bypassing, anything to stop feeling the raw exposure of their unguarded heart. But those empaths who have the courage to remain with the breaking open, to let themselves be completely shattered without rushing to reassemble the pieces, emerge with psychological gifts Jung considered among the rarest in human existence. You learn to feel everything without being destroyed by what you feel. You learn to love deeply without disappearing into the person you love. You learn to sense the emotions of others without assuming responsibility for healing them. You learn to hold space for others without abandoning your own needs. You come to understand that your empathic nature is sacred, not when it depletes you, but when it flows from your own wholeness first. Only then can it be offered to others from abundance rather than emptiness. These lessons cannot be taught in books or in therapy. They are learned only through the sacred fire of experience. They can only be learned through the excruciating tutorial of loving someone impossible and surviving the death of the person you once were, before realizing that love alone would never be enough to save you. Jung made an observation that explains why you can't simply move on, why every technique you've tried to forget this person feels like a betrayal of something sacred inside yourself, as if erasing them would mean erasing part of your own soul. He discovered that empaths form what he called energetic cords, invisible yet psychologically real connections linking your emotional body to the people you've loved deeply. These aren't poetic metaphors or sentimental ideas. Jung believed these cords were actual psychological structures that exist within what he called the collective unconscious, forming unseen threads of connection that remain active long after the physical relationship has ended. When you love as an empath, you don't just connect to someone's personality or behavior. You connect to their essence, to their soul. That's why you still feel them. It's why certain songs can strike your body like lightning, evoking emotions you can't explain. Why you sometimes wake in the still hours of the night, 3 a.m. perhaps, with an ache or sadness that doesn't feel like yours at all. Why you can sense them thinking about you, even when logic insists they're long gone from your life. Jung found that empaths who form these profound energetic cords often experience what he called psychic bleeding, a phenomenon in which the other person's emotional state continues to affect your own, regardless of distance or time. You remain energetically tied to someone who may have completely moved on in their external reality. This creates a rare and particular kind of suffering, one that people without empathic sensitivity can rarely comprehend. Most common advice about moving on assumes that cutting contact, blocking communication, or staying busy will gradually dissolve the attachment. But Jung knew this was not how it worked for empaths. For them, these cords do not disappear through avoidance. They transform only through conscious integration. You must learn to acknowledge the cord, to honor what it represents, to feel gratitude for the connection even as you begin reclaiming the energy you've been unconsciously sending through it. This isn't about forgetting them or pretending they never mattered. It's about retrieving the lost parts of yourself the fragments of your soul you projected onto someone who was never meant to hold them. Jung developed a practice he rarely shared publicly, something he referred to as cord consciousness. He would have empaths sit in deep meditation and visualize the energetic cord connecting them to their impossible love, not to cut it violently, which only deepens psychic wounds, but to transform it, to allow it to remain as a radiant thread of gold, honoring the bond without letting it drain your life force. The practice is one of blessing rather than breaking. You bless the other person's journey while releasing your attachment to being part of that journey. You acknowledge that it is possible to love someone eternally in the realm of souls, while accepting that your human paths are not meant to intertwine. This, Jung found, allows empaths to preserve their empathic gifts while developing what he called sovereign boundaries, the rare ability to feel connection without falling into energetic entanglement. But here is what Jung most wanted empaths to understand. The cord you formed with this impossible person, as painful as it has been, has taught you something vital about your own empathic system. It revealed that you have the capacity to love at the depth of the soul, to recognize and honor another being's essence, to offer a kind of presence and understanding that most humans will never know how to give. The devastation came not because you loved this way, but because you gave this rare and sacred quality of love to someone who was never capable of receiving it or returning it. Your love wasn't wrong. Your capacity to feel wasn't the problem. The pain came from misalignment, from offering something pure and expansive to a person whose emotional readiness could never match your depth. If you're recognizing that you've remained energetically tied to someone long after they left, if you can still sense those invisible cords tugging softly at your heart, write the word releasing below. Sometimes, simply naming what we are finally ready to let go of becomes the first quiet act of reclaiming our power. Carl Jung discovered something profound about empaths and trauma bonding, something that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. When an empath loves someone unavailable, the experience is far more than heartbreak. Jung called it compounded soul wounding, where the present rejection reactivates every buried instance of emotional abandonment stored in your body since childhood. Your impossible love didn't just hurt you in the moment. It tore open a portal, a door leading back to every time you felt unseen, unworthy, too much, or not enough. That's why the pain feels so enormous, so out of proportion to what actually happened. You're not simply grieving the loss of this person. You're grieving every version of yourself that once believed your love was a burden instead of a gift. Jung worked extensively with empaths who grew up with dismissive or emotionally unavailable parents, and what he found was devastatingly consistent. These children learned to read the emotional climate of their homes with microscopic precision. They developed their empathic sensitivity not as a gift of nature, but as a survival mechanism. If you could sense your mother's mood before it erupted, you could adjust your behavior to keep yourself safe. If you could feel your father's disappointment before he voiced it, you could become whatever he needed in order to avoid rejection. Your empathy was not born from ease. It was forged in fire, in the constant vigilance of having to earn love by managing other people's emotions. And so, without realizing it, you created a lifelong template where love became synonymous with effort, with proving, performing, and perfecting yourself to deserve connection. When you met your impossible love, Jung would say, your unconscious recognized them instantly as the perfect person to reenact that original dynamic. They were unavailable in precisely the same way your caregivers once were. They gave you just enough warmth to keep you hoping, but never enough to make you feel safe. They showed you fleeting glimpses of the depth you longed for, but always withdrew when you reached for more. And your empathic system, conditioned since childhood to believe that if you just love harder, feel deeper, or understand better, you will finally earn the love you deserve, went into overdrive. You tried to heal them into availability, to love them into readiness. But here's what Jung found most important for empaths to understand. You weren't truly trying to heal them. You were unconsciously trying to heal your childhood, to prove that unconditional love and perfect understanding could transform someone's capacity to love you back. You were trying to rewrite the story, where your love was never enough to make your parents emotionally available. By making this person finally see you, choose you, stay with you, you hope to close that ancient wound once and for all. But in truth, the impossible love became a stage upon which you were reenacting your oldest heartbreak. Longing for a different ending. Jung called this repetition compulsion, and he didn't see it as pathology, but as the psyche's desperate attempt to heal itself through reenactment. Your unconscious will continue to bring the same lesson again and again, through different faces and familiar emotions, until you finally understand what it's trying to teach you. And for empaths, that lesson is both brutal in its simplicity and devastating in its truth. You cannot love someone into wholeness. You cannot feel someone into healing. You cannot understand someone into choosing you. All the empathic superpowers that once helped you survive childhood slowly become liabilities in adult relationships when you begin using them to bypass a simple but fundamental truth: that love requires two people who are both available, willing, and capable of meeting each other with reciprocal presence. The breaking open happens when you finally accept that no amount of empathic understanding will ever change someone who isn't ready to stand in the arena with you. It's the moment when your illusions start to crumble, when you stop believing that if you just felt more, gave more, understood better, somehow they would transform. When you finally allow yourself to feel the quiet fury that's been buried beneath all that compassion, the rage at having given so much of yourself to someone who returned so little. Jung understood this intimately. He knew that empaths must grieve not only the person who left, but also the powerful illusion, the fantasy that their empathic love has the power to save those who do not wish to be saved. And this grief, raw and unrelenting, is what truly breaks you open. In that breaking, you are given your first real chance to turn inward, to finally offer yourself the very love and understanding you've spent your entire life trying to earn from others. Jung identified this as what he called the empath's gift-curse paradox, a pattern that explains why you've struggled in relationships again and again, not only with this impossible love, but across your entire emotional history. He discovered that empaths possess one of the most extraordinary capacities in all of human connection: the ability to truly see another person's soul, to hold space for their complexity, to love them not despite their wounds, but with tender awareness of how those wounds shaped them. This is your gift. your sacred skill, your rarest light. It allows you to love with a depth and purity that most people will never experience in their lifetime. Yet that same luminous gift turns into a curse when given without discernment, when you offer soul-level recognition to those who are only capable of surface-level connection. When you bring cathedral depth to someone who lives in what Jung called studio apartment consciousness, small, contained, and unable to hold the vastness of your emotional world. The impossible love revealed this paradox in the cruelest way imaginable. You brought your whole self, your vulnerability, your devotion, your truth, to someone who couldn't even bring their partial self to meet you. You offered them entry into chambers of your heart that no one else had ever been allowed to enter, while they kept you standing in the waiting room of their emotional life, never truly letting you in, yet never fully letting you go. Jung observed that empaths often mistake breadcrumbs for full meals, not because they don't know the difference, but because they have been conditioned to survive on emotional scraps. You've learned, over time, to find nourishment in the smallest gestures, to translate inconsistency into meaning, and so even minimal attention begins to feel like abundance. You've been trained to expect so little that when someone offers slightly more than nothing, your entire empathic system floods with gratitude, mistaking basic human decency for profound love. It's a painful realization, but also a necessary one. This, Jung said, is the hardest truth empaths must face. You've been in love not with reality, but with potential, with who this person could become rather than who they actually are, with the flashes of connection that appeared in fleeting, perfect moments, rather than the consistent presence they were never truly willing to offer. Your empathic ability to see the highest potential in others is beautiful when directed toward yourself. It's how you grow, evolve, and heal. But when you use that same gift to justify someone's inability or unwillingness to meet you where you are, it becomes a form of self-abandonment. You've been making excuses for behavior that hurts you, calling it understanding. You've been accepting treatment you would never tolerate a friend accepting, yet calling it compassion. You've been staying in emotional poverty, convincing yourself it was unconditional love. Jung developed a reflective practice he called the mirror reversal, a quiet but revolutionary exercise in empathy. In it, he would ask empaths to imagine redirecting all the empathy, understanding, and compassionate recognition they so naturally pour into others, back toward themselves. He would invite them to sit with that vision, to truly feel what happens inside their bodies the moment they extend even a fraction of that same tenderness inward. What rises when you treat yourself with the gentleness you reserve for those you love? For most empaths, Jung found, the experience was almost unbearably painful at first. It felt unnatural, even wrong. You've spent so long being attuned to others' needs that turning your gaze inward feels selfish, almost like you're betraying your fundamental purpose. But Jung insisted this reversal was not betrayal. It was homecoming. It was the moment when the heart begins to remember its own language. The breaking open created by impossible love serves one primary function in Jung's framework. It forces you to stop outsourcing your worth to how well you can love others, and instead begin cultivating worth through how deeply and honestly you can love yourself. Every moment you spent decoding their mixed signals, could have been spent learning to trust your own clarity. Every hour you devoted to hoping they might change was a moment that could have been used to transform your relationship with your own sense of enoughness. Every day you accepted less than you deserved. You quietly taught yourself that your needs were secondary, that your ability to accommodate others' limitations mattered more than your right to emotional fulfillment. The person you loved impossibly was showing you something profound through their unavailability, a mirror to your own pattern of being unavailable to yourself. You've been abandoning your own emotional needs, suppressing your truth, offering your energy away in hopes that someone, someday, would finally recognize the value of what you've sacrificed. Jung would often pause here and ask the question that changes everything. And I want you to sit with it too. If you brought the same empathic presence to your own heart that you brought to the person who couldn't receive it, how would your life be different? What would shift if you became the one who sees you, holds you, chooses you, and stays with you, no matter what? Sometimes naming that truth aloud is the first step toward returning home to yourself. Share it if it lands within you. If you're beginning to see how you've been available to everyone except yourself. Because sometimes the most radical and healing thing an empath can do is to simply witness their own heart without judgment. Carl Jung made a discovery about what happens after this breaking open, one that offers a deep kind of hope to those convinced they will never recover from such devastation. He found that empaths who fully allow themselves to experience the dissolution of impossible love undergo what he called sacred reconstruction. In this phase, the self that emerges is not a repaired version of who you once were. It's a new consciousness altogether. You do not go back to the person you were before you loved this deeply. You become someone entirely new, someone who carries both the luminous gifts of your empathic nature and the sovereign boundaries that protect those gifts from becoming self-destructive. Jung observed that most people try to heal by rebuilding their old self, by attempting to return to who they were before the heartbreak. But for empaths, this kind of return is not only impossible, it's undesirable. The old self was the version of you that was available to be shattered this way. It was the self that still believed love must come through suffering, that compassion meant self-erasure, that devotion meant depletion. And now, as you rise from the ashes of that version, you begin to understand what Jung meant when he said that the wound is where the light enters. That version of you, the one with permeable boundaries, insufficient self-worth, and the quiet, unconscious belief that your value was measured by how much you could give to others, that version needed to die. Not because she was bad or wrong, but because she was incomplete. She was half a song, missing her own melody. She knew how to love others with wild devotion, but not how to love herself with the same depth. She could hold space for everyone's pain, but never found the courage to sit beside her own. She could see everyone's worth with crystalline clarity, yet remained blind to her own radiance. The reconstruction begins quietly, often without fanfare. It doesn't arrive with lightning or revelation, but through subtle moments of choice. You start noticing the small shifts, the times you choose differently, when someone reveals who they are through their actions, and, instead of making excuses, you believe them. When you sense yourself beginning to pour energy into someone who isn't reciprocating, and this time, you catch it. You pause, you breathe, and you consciously pull that energy back home to yourself. You begin to notice patterns unraveling. When someone's words and behavior no longer align, instead of rushing to bridge the gap with your empathic understanding, you quietly step away. These moments might seem trivial to the untrained eye, almost invisible in their simplicity, but Jung knew they were sacred milestones, evidence of the most profound psychological transformation a human being can undergo. Because in these small acts of reclamation, you're learning to love yourself as fiercely, as consistently, as you've always loved others. Jung called this stage the integration of the inner beloved, the birth of an internal relationship so nourishing, so steady, so unconditionally accepting that external relationships become enhancements rather than lifelines. You stop seeking someone to complete you because you have finally learned the sacred art of being whole within yourself. You stop searching for someone to see you because you now witness your own depth and beauty with clear, compassionate eyes. You stop needing someone to choose you because for the first time, you have chosen yourself. This doesn't mean the longing for connection disappears. It means your desire evolves. You still want love, but you want it from fullness rather than emptiness, from sovereignty rather than need, from choice rather than desperation. Love becomes a partnership between equals, not a rescue mission disguised as devotion. The reconstructed empath, in Jung's framework, becomes what he called a conscious lover. You retain your ability to feel deeply, to perceive souls, to offer profound presence, but now you do it with discernment. You no longer hand your sacred energy to those who can't honor it. You no longer mistake intensity for intimacy or potential for reality. You no longer abandon yourself just to maintain connection with people who refuse to show up fully. You learn to recognize available love when it appears, and perhaps even more courageously, you learn to receive it. Because receiving, as Jung observed, is often far more vulnerable than giving. Empaths who complete this reconstruction discover that their entire energetic landscape begins to shift. They start attracting a completely different quality of people into their lives. The emotionally unavailable stop feeling magnetic because you've healed the wound that once made their distance feel like home. The people who take without giving lose their allure because you no longer mistake depletion for devotion. And the ones capable of meeting you, of matching your depth, reciprocating your emotional intelligence, standing with you heart to heart, suddenly become visible in ways they never were before. You're not looking for someone to save anymore. You're looking for someone to stand beside you, whole to whole, soul to soul. You're looking for someone to build with, someone who's already done their inner work, someone who can meet you where you are without needing to be taught how to love, someone who arrives ready, not unfinished. The impossible love was never meant to be your ending. It was always your initiation. The initiation into becoming the version of yourself who finally understands that your empathic nature is not a flaw to hide, but a sacred gift. One that should only be offered to those who can recognize it, respect it, and rise to meet it. You are not broken because this love broke you open. You are becoming whole because it did. You're finally becoming the person who knows her own worth. Carl Jung spent his final years reflecting deeply on the patterns he observed in empaths who had survived the crucible of impossible love. And what he concluded was both tender and revolutionary. Your capacity to be shattered by love that could not last was never your weakness. It was living proof of your soul's refusal to settle for anything less than truth, even when that truth came wrapped in heartbreak and devastation. In a world that teaches people to protect themselves through emotional detachment, cynicism, and the armor of indifference, you did the opposite. You remained open, dangerously, beautifully open. You loved anyway. You felt everything anyway. You gave completely anyway. And that, Jung believed, is what transforms impossible love from tragedy into sacred initiation. The person you loved impossibly became your greatest, most painful teacher, the guide in a curriculum no one volunteers for, yet every empath eventually faces. They taught you about your immense capacity for depth. They revealed to you the difference between intensity and intimacy. They mirrored the ways you had been abandoning yourself while trying to become everything to someone else. They showed you, in heartbreaking detail, that love without reciprocation is not noble sacrifice. It is self-betrayal. They taught you that understanding someone's wounds does not mean you must tolerate behavior that hurts you. That empathy without boundaries becomes self-erasure. That your gifts, your intuition, your compassion, your sensitivity are precious resources meant to be shared only with those capable of meeting you at your level of awareness and emotional availability. Jung would want you to remember this. Every tear you cried over that person was sacred work. Each one was washing away layers of old programming about your worthiness. Every night you spent lying awake, wondering why you weren't enough, was your psyche dismantling the ancient belief that your value depended on being chosen by others. Every moment you felt abandoned by them was in truth teaching you to stop abandoning yourself. The pain had purpose. The breaking was not punishment. It was preparation. The impossible love was shaping you for available love. Love that is mutual, safe, reciprocal, and rooted in presence. But Jung found something even more beautiful in those who emerged from this experience. He noticed that empaths who survive impossible love often become quiet beacons for others, walking the same path. Through your willingness to feel everything, to stay open rather than shut down, to turn pain into wisdom instead of bitterness, you create a living permission slip for others to do the same. You become evidence that the human heart can be both tender and unbreakable. You become living proof that empaths can love deeply and still maintain sovereignty. That feeling everything doesn't mean being destroyed by what you feel. That impossible love, when faced with courage and truth, can be survived, and even transmuted into something sacred. The reconstructed empath Jung described carries a quality he called tempered radiance. You are still deeply feeling. You still see souls. You still have the capacity for profound connection. But now you are boundaried. Now you are discerning. Now you love yourself as much as you love others. Your light still shines, perhaps even brighter than before. But it no longer shines unprotected. You've learned to offer your gifts wisely, to those who can truly receive them, in spaces where reciprocity flows both ways. You've learned that the highest form of love isn't loving someone despite how they treat you. It's loving yourself enough to require that how they treat you reflects your true worth. And in that moment of realization, when you stop waiting to be chosen and begin to choose yourself, the impossible love finally fulfills its purpose. It breaks you open, only so you can become who you were always meant to be. If you've made it to the end of this exploration, I want to take a moment to honor something profound within you. You've had the courage to turn toward the most painful experience of your life, to sit with it, and to ask not why me, but what did this come to teach me? That quiet act of bravery, the willingness to seek meaning in suffering, is what Jung called the mark of an individuated soul. It means you are no longer merely reacting to life. You are participating in your own evolution. You are not just surviving this impossible love, you are allowing it to refine you, to forge you into someone who will never again accept crumbs when you deserve the entire feast of genuine, mutual love. I'd be deeply honored if you shared, in the comments below, what your impossible love has revealed to you about yourself, your worth, and the kind of love you are now ready to welcome. What truths did your heartbreak uncover? What parts of you were reborn in the aftermath? Your story might be exactly the light another empath needs to keep walking their own path toward healing and wholeness. And if this exploration has helped you see your heartbreak through a new lens, if it has allowed you to glimpse even a small thread of meaning in the chaos, I'd love for you to subscribe, so we can continue delving into the deeper psychology of what it truly means to become whole. Share this with another empath who may need the reminder that their capacity to feel everything is not a flaw to hide, but a superpower, a sacred sensitivity that, when guided by self-love and discernment, can change the very texture of human connection. Thank you for trusting me with this sacred time, for opening your heart in a world that often demands numbness and performance instead of authenticity. Thank you for being willing to transform pain into wisdom, for choosing healing when it would have been easier to close yourself off. The truth is, your empathic heart was never broken. It was breaking open, expanding into its fullest, truest expression of what it means to love and to be human. Until we meet again in the next exploration of what it means to love, to lose, and to rise, remember, every ending is only the beginning of becoming more fully yourself.